I took nuclear revenge on the man who took advantage of my cheating wife, ruined our marriage. Since the day we met, Elaine had always been the heart of our little family. She had this infectious energy that made everyone around her feel more relaxed and at ease. I was taken with her from the moment we crossed paths at a mutual friend's party. And 19 years later, not much had changed. Life as a police officer had worn me down. But Elaine always knew how to lift the weight off my shoulders, even when she didn't realize it. She was more than just my partner, she was my closest confidant, someone who always believed in the best of people. A trait I'd grown skeptical of in others over time. Retirement had been a bittersweet adjustment for me. Swapping the unpredictable pace of the police force for a steady life as a contractor. While Elaine kept up with her demanding job as an executive assistant at Fell International. I found comfort in our routine, raising our son Tommy, and managing the household with a more hands-on approach. But that evening, things began to shift, in a way I wasn't ready for. It was almost 5:30 p.m. And my wife of nearly 2 decades, Elaine, hadn't come home from work or tried to contact me. Normally, she would walk in shortly after 4 o'clock, as her job with Fell International ran from early morning until late afternoon. Since her former boss, Michael Fell, passed away 2 years ago, his daughter Janice had taken over the company. And kept Elaine on as her trusted assistant. Our son Tommy had already gotten home from school. And was upstairs, rushing through his homework, so he could relax in front of the TV later. By 5:45, I was getting concerned, and called Elaine's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. I had just left her a message to call me when she walked in, carrying several bags from Antonio's Italian restaurant. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek on her way to the kitchen. "Sorry, honey, I had to stay late. And didn't take anything out of the freezer for dinner, so I grabbed something from Antonio's. Hope that's okay." "Sure," I said, "but I was worried. Why didn't you call? I forgot to charge my phone last night. And when I got to the car to call you, it was dead." One of my few pet peeves with Elaine was that her phone was often either off, dead, or silenced. So I could rarely reach her when she was out. Whenever I complained, she would always say, "You're right, Joe, I'll do better." She'd remember for a few days, but then things would go back to normal. Frustrating, but something I had learned to live with. Elaine was in a great mood during dinner, but most of the conversation was dominated by our 7th or 8th grade son, who was excited about upcoming baseball tryouts, and frustrated with how much homework his math teacher, Mrs. Fielding, was assigning. We always let Tommy have the TV until his 9 p.m. bedtime, but early on, we decided he would not have a TV in his room. A fact he often complained about. There wasn't a TV in our room either, since we didn't want anything to distract us from sleep or closeness. The latter we managed, at least 4 times a week, making us an outlier among our friends and neighbors, who all seemed to be glued to their multiple TVs. Some people were so hooked on the tube that they even had one in the kitchen. To give you some background, I'm Joe Sullivan, and my wife Elaine and I are a bit unconventional. I retired last year at 50 as a patrol sergeant with the county police department, thanks to the state retirement system, which lets military veterans buy back their service time to add to their police retirement. I was able to count my 4 years as an Army Ranger toward my 25-year retirement. In short, I and other vets had the option to pay into the system the amount the county would have contributed. Applying that time toward retirement, the physical demands of police work, and my part-time handyman job left my 5 feet 1 inch frame with very little body fat. Since retiring, I've turned my side job into a full-time contracting business with connections made over the years, doing small home improvement projects. I don't need to advertise. My reputation for quality work brings in plenty of clients through word of mouth. My wife, Elaine, who will turn 45 next month, was 25 when we married. I was 31, and had just started my police career. The details of our courtship aren't important, but suffice it to say, we met at a friend's party, and I was instantly smitten. Elaine still has the same wavy, shoulder-length brown hair, blue eyes, and captivating smile she had when we met. And at 5 feet 8 inches, she's still a size 8. Besides her attractive looks, it was her lively personality that really drew me in. She can be a little naive about people's motives, which might just be my own cynicism from years in law enforcement. As an executive assistant at a mid-sized international company, she earns a good salary, and together with my increased income as a contractor, we are financially comfortable. We are best friends, respect each other, and our marriage has always been an equal partnership. We share responsibilities, including parenting, cooking, and household chores. Of course, some tasks are split by gender. She doesn't touch yard work, and I stay out of her laundry room. I learned that lesson the hard way, after ruining several of her blouses by mixing colors. Tommy had gone to the living room to watch TV, and I was helping Elaine clear the table and load the dishwasher. Usually after cleaning up the kitchen, we would have coffee before heading to the den to either talk or read. Tonight was no different. As Elaine set a cup of coffee in front of me, she casually mentioned, "Connie got a promotion to head up our London office. And if it's all right with you, we were planning to go out to dinner and maybe dance a little tomorrow night." To be honest, I didn't really keep track of Elaine's work friends, so I couldn't remember who Connie was. But I didn't want to seem uninterested, so I didn't mention it. However, the dancing part caught my attention. "You'll just be dancing together?" I asked. "Of course," she replied. "It'll only be for a few hours, and I'll be home by 11 o'clock. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but since she never went out with the girls, like many of our friends' wives did, I agreed. The next evening, when I got home from work, I asked Joe what he had planned for dinner for himself and Tommy. "Chicken pot pies," he replied, confidently. I frowned. I couldn't stand pot pies, always reminding Joe about their unhealthy sodium levels and high calorie count. But seeing how satisfied he looked, I just shook my head and said, "Connie's picking me up at 7 o'clock, so I'm going upstairs to shower and change." While you two were busy poisoning yourselves, at 6:50, the doorbell rang. I assumed it was Connie, but from upstairs, I heard Joe open the door. Expecting to see Elaine's friend, I opened the door and was surprised to find a well-dressed man, around 35, tall, with wavy blonde hair. My first thought was that he was a salesman, or worse, a Jehovah's Witness, but then I remembered, Jehovah's always came in pairs. He quickly dispelled both notions by extending his hand and saying, "Hi, you must be Joe. Elaine talks about you all the time." As I hesitantly shook his hand, he stepped past me and into the house. Sensing my confusion, he flashed a bright smile. And added, "Oh, maybe you don't remember me. We met briefly at the office Christmas party. I'm Conrad Hunter. I wanted to thank you for letting me take Elaine out tonight. I guess she told you, I'm leaving next week to head our London office. And your wife has been such an incredible help to me these last 2 years that I wanted to show my appreciation." He said all of this in just a few seconds, but his eyes seemed to be sizing me up, and there was a slight air of superiority in his tone. My senses finally kicked in, and I responded, "Well, Conrad, there must be some misunderstanding. Give me a moment to talk to my wife." I hurried up the stairs as quickly as I could, trying to keep my composure. When Joe walked into our bedroom, I just finished adjusting my dress and was checking myself in the full-length mirror. I was wearing a black cocktail dress, classy, but not overly conservative. I picked up my red leather clutch, which matched my 4-inch red heels, and turned to Joe with a smile. I heard the doorbell. That must be Connie. How'd I look? Joe didn't answer, but the anger and disbelief on his face made me ask, "What's wrong?" "Joe, you look upset." "Upset?" he yelled. "My wife wants to go out with some young guy who's trying to make me look like a fool." So no, I'm not just upset, I'm shocked, I'm angry, and embarrassed that there's a man downstairs in my house, waiting to take my wife out for what he thinks is a romantic evening, and unless he's gay, his goal is to get you into bed. I crossed my arms and felt the heat of my own anger building. I knew this conversation wasn't over, and it wasn't going to end well. I could tell from the silence that she was calming herself, preparing for a verbal attack. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with more anger than I had ever heard before. "Well, Joe, I'm the one who's shocked and angry. First of all, you've practically accused me of letting another man seduce me. Your insinuation is not only insulting, it's deeply hurtful. Secondly, I've worked with Connie for 2 years, and he's always been a perfect gentleman. He's never once hit on me or said anything inappropriate. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'm not going to leave him standing down there while you make a fool of yourself. I'll be home around 11 o'clock, and hopefully by then, you'll have pulled your head out of your ass. I stood there stunned, watching her go down the stairs. I couldn't remember ever being this angry. Joe and I had built our marriage on love and trust, and I couldn't believe what my husband of 19 years had just implied. It seemed that the respect and trust I thought we shared was only on my side. Conrad clearly sensed something was wrong, as I gave him a kiss on the cheek. He asked, "Is everything all right?" Forcing a smile, I replied, "Absolutely, ready to go." I glanced back up the stairs, as Conrad placed his hand gently on my back, leading me out the door. From the top of the stairs, I stood watching my wife kiss her date on the cheek. She briefly glanced up at me, and I could have sworn there was a smirk on her face. He wrapped his arm around her waist and guided her out the door. The anger I felt wasn't just directed at Elaine, but also at myself, for not being more forceful in stopping her from going out. By doing this, she was disrespecting our marriage and risking our relationship. Thinking back to yesterday, when she told me about her plans for dinner and dancing with a colleague, I now realized she had deliberately avoided using words like he, him, and his. Just the name Connie. It seemed unlikely someone could avoid using those pronouns, unless it was a deliberate effort to deceive me. Surely, she didn't expect me to remember a brief introduction at a crowded office party from nearly a year ago. Meanwhile, I was in the car with Conrad. He was making small talk, but I was still so upset with Joe that I barely heard what he was saying. I snapped back to reality when he asked, "Well, what do you think?" "Oh, Conrad," I said. "I'm sorry, my mind drifted for a moment." "No worries," he replied. "I was asking what you thought about having dinner at the Chop House. It's in the Marriott, and there's a great dance club there." Forcing thoughts of my recent argument with Joe out of my mind, I responded, "That sounds lovely. I've never been, but I've heard good things about it." Conrad gave me a questioning look, and while reaching over to squeeze my hand, asked, "Is everything okay? Hun, you seemed upset when you came downstairs." And from my brief encounter with your husband, I got the impression he wasn't exactly on board with our date. I noticed him calling me hun, and referring to the evening as a date, along with a hand squeeze, but I didn't find it concerning. After all, I'd known him for 2 years, and plenty of men call their female friends hun. As for the word date, well, in a loose sense, I guess it was. Just not in the way Joe was interpreting it. "You're right," I said. "I assumed Joe remembered you from the party, especially since he had innocently asked later who I was dancing with." Thinking back, I may not have said Connie, maybe I said Conrad. I honestly don't remember. I guess when you showed up, he realized that Connie wasn't the girlfriend he'd been expecting. And he got the wrong idea. "Listen, hun," he said, sympathetically, "if you want to change your mind about tonight, I completely understand. I'd be disappointed, though, not just because you look stunning, but because I was really looking forward to a couple of hours on the dance floor with you." "Absolutely not," I said, perhaps a bit more firmly than I intended. "I'm looking forward to a nice dinner and enjoying your dancing skills, which I must say are impressive. Unfortunately, Joe has 2 left feet and only manages a couple of obligatory dances when we go out." Not wanting to put Conrad off, I added, with a playful smile, in a teasing tone, "But remember, I'm a married woman, and I promise to be home by midnight. I'm all yours until then." I did remember telling Joe I'd be home by 11 o'clock, but that was before he ticked me off. Conrad flashed his dazzling smile, and this time, with a quick touch to my knee, he said, "Great, let's just enjoy the evening, and I'll make sure to get Cinderella home before the clock strikes 12 o'clock. Back at home, Tommy and I ate our pot pies, but for the first time, I couldn't enjoy mine. My son asked when his mom would be back. And since I had already told him she was out to dinner with a girlfriend, I saw no reason to embarrass myself by explaining that his clueless father had allowed her to go on a date with another man. That's exactly how I saw it, a stupid, gullible fool. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. His weekend bedtime was usually extended to 10 o'clock, but honestly, I didn't want to sit alone, staring at the walls, waiting for my wife to come home, so I gave him an extra hour. At 11 o'clock, I sent him off to bed with a hug. Though he was too old for a kiss, it embarrassed him now. I then took up my spot in the living room, watching the muted TV, while waiting for the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My anger had only grown, and I planned to have a serious talk with Elaine. When she got home, I was sure their relationship was professional. But no married woman, especially not mine, should be out dining and dancing with another man. I trusted Elaine, despite my earlier words. But I didn't trust the guy she went out with. Maybe it was my cop instinct, or just the instinct of a jealous husband with a beautiful wife. Either way, his gentlemanly act didn't fool me. I could see the carnivore behind his eyes. I just hoped my Red Riding Hood wouldn't be deceived by the wolf in sheep's clothing. At 11:30, I resisted the urge to call Elaine's cell, but by 11:45, I couldn't hold back any longer. I knew her original home by 11 o'clock had shifted to around 11:30. But I still expected her to answer and tell me she was on her way. Yet again, the call went straight to voicemail, and I didn't leave a message. Since it went directly to voicemail, her phone had to be turned off on purpose, which only made me angrier. We had a great dinner at the Chop House, starting with a couple of Cosmos for me, and some beer for Conrad. I have to admit, I wasn't immune to his flattery about how lucky my husband was to have such a beautiful, charming, and sexy wife. When my age came up in conversation, he boosted my ego even more by saying he assumed I had married an older man, and that I didn't look a day over 35. Flattery works wonders on women, and I was no exception. I had all but forgotten my little argument with Joe, and was excited to hit the dance floor with Conrad. The band was fantastic, and we danced almost non-stop for an hour. We only sat down when a slow song came on, and I subtly guided us off the floor. After the band took a break, I excused myself to use the ladies' room, and when I came back, Conrad had a fresh Cosmo waiting for me, and a beer for himself. I was thirsty from all the dancing, and probably drank it faster than usual, so when the band started up again, and we returned to the dance floor, I felt a bit lightheaded. A few songs into the set, a slow number came on, and I didn't object. When Conrad pulled me into his arms, another slow song followed. And I was actually relieved to hold on to him, as the effects of that last drink made me a little unsteady and dizzy. Noticing my discomfort, Conrad suggested we take a break. I barely registered that he had his hand on my backside as he led me to our booth. Or that he sat next to me this time, instead of across from me, like earlier. By 1 a.m., I had called Elaine's phone 5 times, and left 3 messages. The last one saying, "Elaine, if this is about punishing me, I get it, but I expect you to call me back immediately. If I don't hear from you within the next half hour, I'm going to bed, and locking the deadbolt. You can spend the night with your lover." Knowing you've destroyed a great marriage and a happy family, I was far beyond angry, and my mind was running wild. 1:30 came and went, but I didn't go to bed. I stayed in the living room, wondering if I'd still have a marriage by morning. I felt Conrad's hand leave mine, and slowly begin to caress the inside of my thigh, but I felt powerless to move. Even though I could feel myself getting aroused, I tried to speak, but the booze had impaired my ability to form words, and I felt embarrassed for having gotten so drunk. Part of me knew I should stop this, but another part was enjoying it. At some point, I vaguely recall a distant voice speaking to me, followed by a strong hand helping me out of the booth. I heard the voice say, "Honey, I think you should lie down for a bit, you don't look well." An arm was wrapped around me, holding me up, and guiding me somewhere. I have a vague memory of being in an elevator, unsure where I was going. As I entered an unfamiliar room, there was a bed, and I knew I needed to lie down. I wasn't tired, but my body felt disconnected from my mind. I heard some soft, unintelligible words, and then Conrad's lips were on mine. Before long, I felt the cool air against my bare skin. From the corner of my eye, I saw my clothes in a pile on the floor. He got on top of me and took me. My eyes instinctively closed. When I managed to open them slightly, I saw a face with blue eyes staring into mine as he continued having sex with me. "Not Joe, not Joe," my mind screamed, but no words came out. As my mouth opened, my body trembled with an overwhelming climax. Meanwhile, I was in full panic mode. By 5 a.m., after making several more unanswered calls, I finally collapsed onto my bed. Falling into an exhausted and restless sleep, convinced that our marriage was over, unless something catastrophic had happened. There was no excuse I would accept, or reason to forgive her for this blatant betrayal. Just after 7 a.m., my phone rang. Thinking it was Elaine, I was tempted not to answer. Believing there was nothing she could say, to undo the damage she had caused, but when I looked at the caller ID, I saw a number I didn't recognize. Reluctantly, I hit the accept button, and groggy, answered. "Hello," the voice on the other end asked, "Is this Joe Sullivan?" As I confirmed, a sick feeling grew in my stomach, fearing that someone might be calling to inform me of that catastrophic event I had brushed off earlier. "Joe, this is Terry Connor, remember me?" Terry had been one of the newer patrol officers under my supervision before I retired. He was an ex-Marine and a solid cop, more streetwise than some of his peers who hadn't served in the military. "Of course, Terry," I replied, my worry clear in my voice. "What's going on?" He hesitated before asking, "Is your wife home?" A wave of dread hit me as I responded, "No, she went out to dinner with a colleague and was supposed to be back by 11 o'clock last night. I haven't been able to reach her. Every call has gone to voicemail. Is she all right?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Yes, and no," Terry said. "Joe, she's at Mercy Hospital. She came to the ER on her own, reporting that she had been sexually assaulted." I caught the call, but all she would say was her name and that her husband was a former cop. She refused to talk to anyone but you. She doesn't have any visible injuries, but they're running blood tests and doing a sexual assault exam. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but you should get down here as soon as possible. I'll have to call this into the detectives, but I wanted to give you a heads up. How soon can you get here? 15 minutes, I responded, abruptly. "Okay, Joe, normally I'd have to return to patrol when the detectives arrive, but I'll stall for a bit, so you can get here before they do." "Thanks, Terry," I said, sincerely. "I'll be there as fast as I can." My first thought was, I'm going to kill that prick. I didn't want to wake Tommy, but I couldn't leave him to wake up in an empty house, unaware of what was going on. I went to his room and gently shook him awake, saying, "Hey, son, wake up." He rubbed his eyes, looking confused. But I continued, quickly, knowing I had little time. "Tommy, your mom was in a minor car accident. She's okay, but they're checking her out at the hospital, as a precaution. I need to go down there with the insurance information. I just didn't want you to wake up and find the house empty. Like I said, she's fine, no cuts, no broken bones, so don't worry, go back to sleep, I'll be home soon." Though concerned, he mumbled, "Okay, Dad," and laid his head back down. My hands were shaking so badly, I struggled to get the key into the ignition. When I woke up, it was because I urgently needed to use the bathroom, but I was still groggy and confused. The room was dark, except for the faint glow coming from a nightlight in the bathroom. I slipped out of bed and made my way toward the light. As my mind began to clear, I realized I wasn't in my own home, sitting on the toilet. I realized it wasn't just the need to go that had woken me. It was the pain in my rectum. When I wiped, I saw traces of blood on the toilet paper, and that's when I understood what had happened. As I sat there, flashes of the previous night slowly came back to me, and the realization of what I had likely endured made me feel sick. I started to gag. I barely had time to turn and fall to my knees before I began to vomit. Once my stomach was empty, I stood, leaning against the bathroom vanity, staring at a woman in the mirror I hardly recognized. My eyes were bloodshot, there were bite marks on my neck and shoulder, and my hair was matted, in places with what could only be drying semen. Shame and guilt washed over me, like a crashing wave, pulling me under. I couldn't bear to look at the woman in the mirror any longer. She didn't reflect the confident, happy wife and loving mother I was supposed to be. Still leaning on the counter, my head hung low as the tears started to fall. When I finally forced myself to look at the reflection again, I knew my naive stupidity and stubbornness had cost me my self-respect. The trust of my husband, and probably my son's respect as well. If I had a knife or a gun, I would have killed the prick who had stolen my life for his own selfish pleasure. How could I have gotten this drunk, I thought, but as I replayed what I could remember, I realized I had only had 3 drinks, 2 at the restaurant, and 1 at the club. That might give me a slight buzz, but it wasn't enough to make me lose control like that. "He drugged me," I said out loud. That disgusting creep had slipped something into my drink. I knew what I wanted to do. When I saw him still asleep, lying naked on his back, I imagined clawing his eyes out, ripping his balls off, or biting his penis. But I knew I didn't have the strength to do any of that. Instead, I knew what I had to do. Moving quickly and quietly, I got dressed. With one last look of pure hatred at the man I once admired, I slipped out of the room. It took me just under 15 minutes to get to the emergency room. And as promised, Terry was waiting for me. The waiting room was nearly empty, due to the early hour. "Where is she?" I demanded, as I headed toward the curtained cubicles. Terry stopped me immediately, placing a firm hand on my chest. "Hold on, Joe, she's asleep. They gave her a sedative to calm her down. She was pretty hysterical. The detectives will be here soon. Take them to get your thoughts together. Get my story straight," I asked, angrily. "What are you talking about?" Terry, still looking like the Marine he once was, firmly guided me to a corner, away from any listening ears, despite being 15 years younger and stronger than me. He whispered, calmly, "Listen, Joe, I'm on your side. I don't know the details of your marriage, and I don't need to. What I do know is that at 4:15 this morning, your wife came here in a cab, claiming she had been raped. They're going to want to know where you were. Why she wasn't home with her family, who she was with, and why she showed up here, dressed for a night out." She refused to answer any of my questions, insisting she'd only talk to you, out of respect for you. I didn't press her, but the detectives will. I'm just saying, be ready to minimize any fallout for your family. Before I could thank Terry, two things happened at once. Two detectives arrived, and the doctor approached us. One detective was male, and I recognized him right away, Harvey Berg, an old school cop, with 30 years on the force. The other was a woman I didn't know. As the doctor approached, Harvey paused, letting the female detective continue. He whispered something to her. And though she looked irritated, she stopped. The doctor, speaking with a slight Middle Eastern accent, asked, "Are you the patient's husband?" I couldn't help but notice, he didn't refer to me as the victim's husband. Terry patted my back, and headed toward the exit. "I'm Dr. Nadale," he introduced himself. "Your wife has no visible injuries, though she does have some tearing in her rectum. It won't require surgery, and should heal quickly. There are also bite marks, or what people often call hickeys, on both her breasts, but they don't need treatment." My heart sank, as a wave of nausea hit me, imagining Elaine being violated and hurt by that dirtbag. The doctor continued, "We performed a sexual exam, and found semen in both her vulva and anus, as well as dried semen in her hair, indicating recent sexual activity. We've taken blood for alcohol and drug testing, but the results aren't back yet. As of now, that's all I can tell you, or the investigators." His clinical tone irritated me, especially the way he framed it as sexual activity, rather than rape. Sexual encounter didn't fit what I knew had happened. Your wife refused to answer any questions, except to claim she had been drugged, and she insists on speaking only with you. I don't see any reason to admit her to the hospital, but I'll hold off on releasing her until the blood work comes back. She's had a mild sedative to calm her down, but she's awake now. You can go see her. Do you have any questions, Mr. Sullivan? He asked. I shook my head. No, all right, if any come up, feel free to have me paged. The results should be back in about an hour, and I'll consult with you then. Without offering any sympathy, he turned and left. I started toward the cubicles, but the female detective, a short brunette, with a stern expression, stepped in front of me, blocking my way. My first instinct was to push her aside, but before I could react, she spoke, authoritatively. I'm sorry, Mr. Sullivan, but my partner and I need to speak to your wife first. This is a criminal investigation, and we need her statement. I looked over at Harvey, who was approaching, shaking his head in frustration. He said, firmly, to her, let it go, Anderson. Joe can see his wife for a few minutes, and then we'll do the interview. She flushed with anger, and responded, Harvey, you know the rules. Letting the husband in before us risks tampering with her statement, which could be used later in a trial. I later learned her name was Sandra Anderson, a 27-year-old rookie detective, with less than 5 years on the job. She had a big connection, though. Her uncle was the deputy mayor. Harvey, clearly unimpressed, replied, sarcastically, look, Anderson, I was making felony arrests before you were born. As lead detective, I'm in charge here. Joe Sullivan is a colleague, retired or not, and he deserves some professional courtesy. If that bothers you, go wait in the car, or the cafeteria. If you want to report me, go ahead. I'm looking for an excuse to retire anyway. Anderson stormed off, her face red. Once she was out of earshot, Harvey muttered, goddamned affirmative action. She couldn't catch a gambler at a poker game. Go ahead, Joe, he added, I'll give you 15 minutes while I finish some paperwork. When I pulled back the curtain to Elaine's cubicle, she turned her head toward me. And upon realizing it was me, turned away, and started sobbing. I pulled up a chair, and sat quietly, waiting for her to compose herself. I felt sympathy, seeing her so distraught, but honestly, my anger outweighed my empathy, at that moment. I couldn't bring myself to look my husband in the eye, so I turned away, and just started crying. I desperately wanted him by my side. But now I didn't even know what to say. How could I possibly apologize for ignoring his concerns, only to end up being used by a sexual predator? In the harsh light of day, I realized it had been a date. No matter how innocent my intentions were, I had gone out to dinner and dancing with a man who wasn't my husband. Lying here, I kept thinking about how I would have reacted if the roles were reversed. What if Joe had told me he was going out with Andy? And Andy turned out to be Andrea, a younger, more attractive woman he wanted to reward for some reason. Joe's voice interrupted my dark thoughts. As he said, Elaine, the detectives will be in here soon to take your statement, so be ready. Some of their questions will be embarrassing and intrusive. If you're claiming this happened because you were mentally incapacitated by drugs or booze, you have to be honest. I have to warn you, if you try to mislead them, they'll know. The lead detective has over 30 years of experience, and is a skilled interrogator. He'll see through any attempt to lie. His detached tone struck me, and the only words that stuck in my mind were claim and deception. Beyond that, he hadn't even touched me. No comfort, no warmth. He sounded more like a lawyer than my husband. Even through my tears, anger started to build inside me, and finally, I turned to him and snapped, Joe, you sound like you don't believe me. I wouldn't talk to anyone until you got here, because you've known me for over 20 years. You know that while what I did was stupid, I never intended to have sex. Let alone be raped by someone I trusted and considered a friend. Damn it. Joe, I wasn't seduced by that monster. I was drugged and violated. But I guess you don't see it that way, so why don't you just leave and go hang out with your cop buddies? I turned away again, too angry to cry anymore. I heard his chair scrape against the tile floor, and moments later, the privacy curtain opened and closed. I knew he was gone, probably for good. When I returned to the waiting room, Harvey looked up, with a questioning expression. His irritated partner sat across the room, arms crossed, with a sulky look on her face. Thanks, Harvey, I said, sincerely, knowing that what he had done for me could cause him trouble. You can go in now, he nodded. But for the record, I intentionally provoked her anger, and I believe she's telling the truth. He gave a signal to his partner, who reluctantly followed him into the cubicle. About 45 minutes later, neither Harvey nor his partner had come back out, when I noticed Dr. Nadale scanning the now crowded waiting room. He spotted me and gestured for me to follow him into a small exam room down the hall from the ER. Once we were seated, his tone was noticeably softer than earlier. The lab results are back, and they show a significant amount of rehypnol and ketamine in her system. As you know from your time as an officer, these are commonly referred to as date rape drugs. When combined, they lower inhibitions and increase libido, while also impairing the body's ability to communicate between the brain and muscles, making resistance nearly impossible. I've explained this to the detectives, and provided them with a copy of the analysis. I've started an IV to help clear her system, and she should be able to leave in about 3 hours. He stood and offered his hand, adding, I'm very sorry for what you and your wife are going through, but given the circumstances, I believe that time, and perhaps some counseling, will help both of you recover. As he turned to leave, I stood and asked, Doctor, may I ask you a few questions? Though he looked a bit uncomfortable, having considered his duty as the attending physician finished, he nodded reluctantly. Likely knowing where this was headed, I understand about the drugs and their effects, I began, but what I really need to know is, do those drugs prevent someone from experiencing sexual pleasure? He sighed, motioning for me to sit, as he did the same, in a patient but measured tone. He replied, Mr. Sullivan, I can't give you a definitive answer. However, when the body's sexual organs are stimulated, it's possible for the body to react. Even if the brain doesn't, the reaction is purely physiological, with no voluntary or emotional involvement. Then he added, to answer your underlying question, yes, it's possible your wife experienced a climax. Even victims who have been forcibly raped, without drugs, sometimes report climaxing. It often adds to their trauma, as they feel betrayed by their body for deriving physical pleasure from an unwanted act, whether drugged or physically forced. The response is still involuntary. Much like a reaction to pain, he gave my shoulder a reassuring pat, stood up, and left, likely relieved that I had no more difficult questions to ask. I hadn't noticed that Harvey and his partner were standing near the entrance to the treatment area, apparently waiting for the doctor to leave. As Harvey approached, his partner, looking slightly less hostile, stayed back, letting him take the lead. Harvey began. "Joe, you've got 20 years of police work under your belt. So I won't insult your intelligence by explaining the procedures. First, I'm sorry for you, and especially for your wife. Based on her statement and the lab report, I'm confident she was drugged. And given her inability to consent, she was raped. The dirtbag probably spiked her drink when she went to the ladies' room. She had no idea what was happening, and doesn't remember much of the assault." He paused, before continuing. "Now for the hard part. I hate to say this, Joe, and if I were telling this to a stranger, it would be a major breach of protocol. But for the sake of your family, especially your wife, I wouldn't recommend pursuing charges against this guy." I started to object, but Harvey cut me off. "Hear me out, Joe. Whatever you decide, I'll back you, but you know better than anyone how flawed our legal system is if this piece of trash gets a decent lawyer. The first thing they'll point out is that your wife willingly went on what looks like a date with him. Yeah, I know she blindsided you, she explained everything, but to a jury, the fact that she went out to dinner, had drinks, and danced with him won't look good. As for the drugs, they'll argue she took them voluntarily to lower her inhibitions." He sighed and continued. "There's case law on this, Joe, both in this jurisdiction and nationwide. Some women have used these drugs themselves. They'll argue that when she realized how much time had passed, she panicked, thinking her marriage was in jeopardy, and made up a story to cover her tracks." I stayed quiet, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You don't need me to tell you how ruthless defense attorneys can be. They'll drag both of you through the mud, and the media will paint you as a permissive husband, and her as a promiscuous wife. Your son could face backlash from his peers. And in the end, the guy could still walk free." Harvey softened his tone. "Joe, talk to your wife, it's her decision in the end, but I need to know what you want to do before I leave. I can write this up as an unfortunate situation, where your wife was led astray, and the report will stay buried. After 30 years, I've earned plenty of favors from the department and the DA. So you won't have to worry about charges or a false report." At first, I was hysterical when it was suggested that my assailant might walk away free. I screamed, "No one believes me, not the doctor, not the cops, not even my husband." Joe tried to grab my hand, but I pulled it away and began to sob. He held my hand again, but this time refused to let go when I tried to yank it away. "Elaine, everyone believes you, everyone. This isn't about believing you, it's about facing a harsh reality. It's not about letting that dirtbag off the hook, it's about sparing you the humiliation and indignity of a public trial. One that would play out, not just in the courtroom, but in the local media too. If we had even a 5,050 chance of winning, I wouldn't suggest this. But honestly, it's not even close." In the end, I reluctantly agreed. I think I did it more to protect Tommy from the embarrassment than for myself. As promised, Harvey buried the story, and we never heard from the DA. Unfortunately, not all stories have happy endings, and ours was one of them. The counseling sessions were emotionally draining for both of us, especially when Elaine described the one moment she clearly remembered. She told me how, during the encounter, when she opened her eyes, she initially thought it was me having sex with her. Even when she realized it wasn't me, but him, she was in the middle of a climax, and continued to let it happen. The therapist tried to explain her reaction by asking me, "Joe, if you were in a similar situation and started a climax, do you think you could stop?" I responded, sarcastically, "You mean pull my penis out of her mouth, or from down there, or back there?" I added, bitterly. I saw Elaine flinch at the innuendo from the corner of my eye. After a pause, I answered more seriously, "First of all, Doc, I wouldn't put myself in that situation. So the question is moot, but hypothetically, yes, I'd stop." We tried hard to salvage our relationship over the next 8 months. But it felt like watching a snowman slowly melt until the head finally fell off and shattered. Oddly enough, I had almost forgotten about the actual sex. What haunted me more was the image of her walking down those stairs, reaching up to kiss him on the cheek, and the defiant look she gave me. As he put his arm around her and walked her out the door, and in hindsight, out of my life, Elaine later explained how she had been angry and kissed him just to spite me, to tweak my nose a bit, as she put it, but the fact that she wanted to hurt me like that was more than I could get past. The disrespect, the betrayal, and the lying were the real butchers of our marriage. I had warned her about the potential consequences, but she chose to ignore me. She made her bed, and I refused to sleep in it. She would have to sleep in it alone. It's been 2 years since our tearful divorce. I gave Elaine the house until Tommy turns 18 or graduates from college, though I'll likely give it to her in the end. I have a pension and a successful business. And she received a $250,000 settlement from the company. Even though they denied any wrongdoing, Elaine did manage a small victory over Conrad Hunter. Although we were advised that a civil suit wasn't likely to succeed, our attorney submitted our notarized statements and the drug report. Of course, the creep denied everything, but 2 sexual harassment complaints against him from his previous office had been overlooked, either intentionally or not. One female employee had accused him of groping her in the break room, and another, a married woman, requesting a transfer to another city, claimed he offered to insure the move in exchange for sexual favors. Neither complaint was substantiated. Elaine's case fell into the same he said, she said category, but the company, tired of the potential legal risks he posed, terminated him without cause. Not only did he lose his promotion to London, but he was let go, without a letter of recommendation, after 12 years. The company gave Elaine the money to avoid a public embarrassment and costly lawsuit. We both regretted that our marriage couldn't be saved. But we also recognized the futility of continuing a charade that was injuring our son. As far as I know, neither of us dated for over a year. Though Elaine has recently been seeing someone regularly, he's a few years younger than her and was widowed young. He seems like a good man. And on the rare occasions we cross paths, he's always friendly, but it's hard to forget 19 years of closeness with a wife. Initially, I was polite but distant toward him, though my jealousy has lessened over time. Now I genuinely wish them well. My softening attitude likely has a lot to do with Alicia, the woman I've been seeing. She was a customer of mine for several home improvement projects. And she finalized her divorce over a year ago after her abusive, booze-dependent husband put her in the hospital with a concussion and a fractured collarbone. Her 14-year-old son, Kevin, and I have become close, and I've included him on several outings with Tommy. The boys get along well. And while my relationship with Alicia has become intimate, we've kept separate residences, partly for appearances with the kids, and partly because we're both a little cautious about marriage again. Now for the part I've never shared. While Elaine got her revenge on Conrad, mine came later. During my years on the force, I met all kinds of people. The good, the bad, and the truly ugly. One of the latter was Mario, an Irish mob enforcer. I'd arrested him 3 times for assault, but he walked each time. 3 months after the incident with my wife, I ran into Mario. He greeted me like an old friend, and we talked about life. 5 days later, he called me to meet him at a local bar. After our drinks, he led me to his car and said, "I've got a gift for you." He opened the trunk, revealing a small bag. Inside was a jar, the kind used in biology labs. Mario shone his phone's light on it. And I saw what looked like a male organ and 2 testicles. Mario grinned and said, "Your wife's tormentor won't show his face to a woman again. Don't worry, he's alive. He just won't be the big man anymore." I had no words. I shook his hand and went home. Sometimes life gives you unexpected gifts. 2 years after our divorce, Elaine and I have slowly found our way forward. The pain and resentment that once defined our relationship have mostly faded. Though the scars are still there, reminders of what was lost, we tried our best to salvage what we could, but some things, like trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. We were together for 19 years, raised a son, and shared countless memories, but the betrayal, whether intentional or not, was too deep to overcome. Elaine's life has taken a different path. She's been seeing someone regularly, a younger man, who's been widowed for several years. From what I can tell, he seems like a good man, and though it stung at first to see her moving on, I've learned to let go of my jealousy. The occasional times when we cross paths, he's always respectful toward me, and I've even wished them well. despite everything, Elaine deserves happiness. And I've come to accept that her happiness no longer involves me. She's not the woman who left the house that night, and I'm no longer the man who watched her walk out the door. As for me, I found someone too, Alicia. We met when I did some contracting work for her after her own bitter divorce. Her ex-husband's abusive and violent nature left her wary of relationships, but over time, we built something special. I've taken things slowly, partly out of caution, and partly out of respect for our kids. Her son, Kevin, has grown close to Tommy, and they've become friends through our weekend outings. My relationship with Alicia has its own set of challenges, but it feels different, healthier, more honest. We've kept separate homes for now. But we're taking steps forward, and for the first time in a long while, I feel optimistic about the future. In the aftermath of everything, Elaine and I were able to handle things peacefully, for the sake of Tommy. He's a strong, bright kid. And watching him grow and navigate through this difficult time has been a source of pride for both of us. He didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of our mistakes, and if nothing else, I'm thankful we kept our focus on giving him the stability he needed. Elaine got the house, and when Tommy turns 18, it will likely stay hers. I've done well enough in my business to provide for myself and for Tommy. And I don't begrudge her what she's been through. Elaine managed to get some measure of justice with her settlement from the company. And while I was bitter at first that her assailant Conrad walked away without facing criminal charges, I found my own closure in an unexpected way. What Mario did, what he gave me, wasn't the kind of justice I had envisioned, but it felt like justice nonetheless. That man would never hurt anyone again, and though I would never condone the violence, a part of me was grateful that someone had delivered the punishment I couldn't. In the end, life moves on. The bitterness, the anger, and the heartbreak, all of it has slowly been washed away by time. While there will always be a part of me that looks back at those 19 years with regret, there's another part that remembers the good times. Elaine wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend, and for most of those years, we were a team. But sometimes, even the strongest bonds can break under the weight of life's pressures. And when they do, you're left to rebuild. From the ground up, I rebuilt, and I'm still rebuilding. Elaine has too. Our marriage is over, but life isn't. I don't know what the future holds for either of us, but I do know that we're both stronger now, in our own ways. We've learned from our mistakes, and we've moved on. Life has a way of surprising you, and while I didn't see this path coming, I'm learning to embrace it, one day at a time.